Here comes the sun. It's going to be a beautiful day, not a cloud in the sky. I'm a little bit nervous because I believe we got some frost. It's still a bit too dark to tell, so I'm just waiting for the sun to pop over those hills so I can go and give the garden a good look over and make sure all my seedlings that I planted out into the ground are doing okay and have survived. So things are looking pretty good out here. I can't spot any frost and all of my seedlings in this area at least are still looking alive and kicking. We can move on from that non-issue now and get stuck into this week's garden update. I'm particularly interested in showing you two areas that I've been working on during the week. One is down in the fan garden and the other space is where I have all my containers full of edibles. But let's start off with a very important morning garden chore. One of the first things that I do in the morning is I open up the greenhouse to get some airflow in here. It's really messy in here at the moment. I've been trying to sort out my seedlings, doing a bit of potting up too. I have to come in and sort things out, but while we're in here I want to show you something very exciting. I have the first few seeds germinating here and over there. These ones are the drumstick scabiosa, and over here are some baby's breath. Oh, look at this! I have a few of the ageratum blue along here, and I've also spotted some Ami seeds just down there. Really tiny little seedling, but they're beginning to pop through as well. With the baby's breath and the Ami magus, it is recommended, as far as I can remember on the seed packet, that you should direct sow those seeds onto the ground or into the ground. And as you just saw there, I haven't done that. I have sown them first in punnets where I will be transplanting them out into the garden beds later on. Now, I should mention, of course, I'm not any kind of expert at all when it comes to gardening, but this is something I do quite a lot, especially with summer annuals like zinnias. The packaging always says, or most of the time it says, to sow them direct into the ground, and I don't do that. And I always find, as long as you're careful with the roots, when you are transplanting them from the cells to the ground, the plants usually do really well. And I guess the only comparison I really have are self-seeded plants, like with the zinnias, or I have had the Ami self-seed before, and I don't know, I just don't really notice a difference between either method. So yeah, that's just from my experience. I'm not saying it's right or wrong. I just want to share, what happens here in this garden. I guess the reason why I said all of that was because I think it's worthwhile encouraging gardeners to do a bit of experimenting, trialing out new plants, different ways of growing them, especially when you're starting them off from seed. Every year I always try new varieties, new methods, just to see what works for me here in my climate. And what might work for me will not work for you, but it's just adding a bit of fun and spice into the gardening world. Just outside the greenhouse, in all of these pots and this larger container, I have all of those Dahlia Tubers which I dug out last week. Today I need to put all of these underneath the house to store over the next few weeks until spring arrives, and then I'll be able to bring them out again and transplant them into the garden. I'm down at the very back of our property here in the fan garden. I know it doesn't look like much at the moment, but I've put so much work into it this week. The weeds in here have been so bad that I ended up using some of this weed mat to cover up the rows, with the hope that this will smother out any weeds underneath. Usually I like to use cardboard like I've done so over here, but I don't have that much at the moment, and since I have this weed mat, I might as well put it to good use. I'll go through all the beds and let you know what's happening in each of them. So here I do need to do a bit more clearing out. There's lots of nasturtiums that I don't particularly want in that spot. Underneath this soil I have lots of Dahlia Tubers, actually some of them you can see here, are quite exposed, so I need to come in and cover that up. In row 2, I ended up putting in some of those ranunculus that I had in the greenhouse. Now, if you're wondering why I've left my coffee mug in that spot, it is to warn myself to be careful, because in my rush to get down this weed mat, like look at all the weeds under there, there's so many. I dug out a section here removing a really quite deep rooted weed, and I never backfilled it with soil. So when I was out here, I nearly broke my ankle. I tripped over it. So quickly, as a temporary solution, I've used my mug to make sure I remember to be careful in this spot. But this morning I will be coming out and filling up the hole in there. Behind the ranunculus in this section, I've removed a lot of the weeds. I still need to do a bit more weeding in here, and then I'm going to come in and cover it with a layer of mushroom compost. Now on to row 3. At the front here I have a lot of lemon balm. It's very similar to mint. It pops up everywhere, so I dug up some clumps that are around the garden and I transplanted them into this spot, so I have quite a lot together, and I'm going to use this as lovely lemon scented foliage to put into garden posies. Behind them are some of the anemones that were also in the greenhouse, like the ranunculus. I've put them into the ground. I did notice I have this big stump. I'm not quite sure what that's left over from. I can't remember what was in this area, a couple of years back, but I don't know, hopefully it will just decay away and feed the soil. Now behind all those anemones is where it gets a little bit messy. So I have the lemongrass. I really want to either move this back perhaps a meter up against the hedge here, or just cut it all back, dig it up, and I don't know, I just don't need that much lemongrass. Maybe I'll give some of it away, freeze some of them, I'm not sure. I still need to do that. And you can see along here there's still quite a lot of weeds too. Actually, I had a load of this, which is a sedum called Autumn Joy, and I dug it up. It was over there in that spot, and there's more in here hidden underneath the foliage of the lemongrass that I need to dig up. And then behind them, I think this is sea holly. I'm not sure. Does that look like sea holly foliage? Or maybe that's the clump of sea holly and this is a weed. I don't know. Is anyone able to identify this? Let me show you what I did with some of this Autumn Joy Sedum. I pretty much divided up the clump, and I took smaller pieces like this and I popped them over here into row 4. You can see that they're quite small at the moment, but these should fill out nicely and they produce the most beautiful flower in autumn. I'll pop a picture of it up here on the screen. Behind them are all of these achillea or yarrow. I have 2 with the achillea, divided some of it up to spread it out a bit more and make this patch a little bit larger. And behind them I dug up all of the Verbena bonariensis. Well, all I could see, all of these plants that were spread out around the garden, and I put them all into this one spot with the hopes that, I'll just keep it contained in one area and it will just make it much easier for picking. So we've gone through row 1, 2, 3, 4, and finally we have row 5. This row is slightly wider, so what I've done here with each of these beds, I've made them a meter in width, and this one is, I think it was 1.4 meters in width. And I am still unsure about what I'm going to do in this section, because if you remember back over the last few months, this was the area that when we did receive the heavy rains, it got quite badly flooded, and I had a whole load of snapdragons in here that just died off. They weren't able to cope with the saturated soil. I'm thinking I either build the soil up quite high or I install some more of these raised garden beds in this spot. I just had to put the cardboard down here because the weeds were ferocious. Well, that looks like it's got a little bit of frost on it. You can see the little shimmer on them. If we peek under here, it's pretty bad. Look at that. Absolutely dense with weeds. Also this week, I changed over some of the edibles which are growing here in these containers. These 3 pots have been freshly planted, and you may be thinking, flowers, that's not quite an edible. Well, these are violas, and all of these will fill out this space, and I'll be able to harvest these pretty little flowers that I can add into garden salads or even decoration on cakes and cupcakes. Beside them is some rocket, and then over here I've got a whole load of chives. They're kind of looking a little bit sad at the moment, but they should bounce back come springtime. And I just noticed there a few little weeds that actually looks like a pansy or viola, but I don't really want them growing in here, so I'm just going to pull them out. I've been picking the odd few carrots from this container. Let me see if I can find one to show you. These are the Paris market. Just brush some of the soil away from the edge here. You can kind of get an idea of how big the carrot top is. Let's pull this one out and check it out. Oh, beautiful. Good morning, cockatoos. Oh, they're so noisy, aren't they? Got some lovely bok choy in here, and I do have a whole load more that I need to pop out into the garden, which I showed you last week. And then we're still waiting on the kohlrabi, the beetroots, although they are starting to fill out a bit now. More weeds, oh my goodness. And in here you have the leeks. I have a bit more lettuce, and over there is some rainbow chard. You might notice here with the leeks that they're planted quite tightly together, and it's important to note that if you do this, it means the leeks won't grow as large as the label indicates. So here I've got this leek label. Let's just check and see how big it says or how much spacing they need. So it says here they get to 30 to 45 centimeters, and the spacing should be 10 to 12 centimeters apart. So, you know, by having these so closely packed together, they are definitely not going to reach the height on the label, but I'll be able to pick them as slightly smaller baby leeks, which is fine by me. I've got 3 more containers by the back porch waiting to be filled up, and I'm thinking with those ones I may actually just sow a few flower seeds. And in my mind I'm thinking perhaps poppies. Now with poppies you usually sow them back in autumn, and I'm very behind. It's almost the middle of winter here, but I do know from past experience that I can grow poppies which are sown in July. I think I did it a couple of years ago. Actually, it might have actually been more than a couple of years ago, because I think it was pre-YouTube, which is almost 4 years. So maybe 5 years ago I did it, and they grew wonderfully. The one thing I did notice was the blooms only started to come in, I think it would have been November, December, which is very late in spring. But it worked, so I think I may give that a go again. There's one variety in particular that I'm really excited to try out. It's called Danish Flag, and it has the most beautiful ruffled red and white petals. Wait until you see it. Here's the seed packet. I'll see if I can get a photo to show you next week, because I've never grown it before, so I have no past pictures to pop up. Anyway, I think that's about it for this week, everyone. Thank you so much for sticking around till the very end. Remember, if you're new to my channel, please consider subscribing. I would really appreciate your support. Well, until next Friday, happy gardening.